A police officer and his loyal K9 were patrolling the silent, snow-covered streets of Silver Hollow. Then came a sharp bark. Urgent. Insistent. The dog bolted. Moments later, they found her. A little girl in a torn pink coat, half buried in the snow, her lips blue, her arms clutching a teddy bear frozen stiff. She had collapsed trying to get help for her mother. What happened next changed 3 lives. And maybe it will change yours too. But before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far her courage travels. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in Silver Hollow, Montana. The kind of morning where the world felt frozen in time. Rooftops glazed with ice, the pale sun flickering through a veil of gray clouds, and the wind whispering through pine branches heavy with snow. The streets lay undisturbed, blanketed by an overnight snowfall, save for the occasional tire track, already fading into white. Officer Caleb Hart sat behind the wheel of his patrol SUV, engine running low and steady, warmth humming through the vents. He sipped lukewarm coffee from a dented travel mug and watched the silent town from behind the windshield, lost in thought. He wore his duty well, the thick winter uniform, the polished badge, the belt heavy with years of repetition, but his mind was elsewhere. Caleb was 44, though he carried himself like someone older. His frame was tall and solid, but not bulky. His movements were careful, deliberate. A rugged man with a square jaw that hadn't seen a razor in days, crow's feet at the corners of gray-blue eyes, and a scar just under his right cheekbone. A gift from Kandahar, though he never spoke of it. His hair was close-cut, peppered with silver at the temples, always hidden beneath his dark patrol cap. But what set Caleb apart wasn't the weight he carried on his belt. It was the one he carried in his chest. Since returning from the Marines, Silver Hollow had been a kind of purgatory. Quiet, snowbound, filled with good people and long silences. It was a town that didn't ask questions. Maybe that's why Caleb stayed. No one here looked at him like a man broken. They just saw a man who patrolled their streets and kept the drunks from freezing in alleyways. Only Rex ever truly looked through him. Rex, his K9 partner, sat in the passenger seat, ever alert. 6 years old, a sturdy German shepherd with a thick coat of black and tan, amber eyes always scanning. His ears twitched at every sound, his breath fogging the window as he stared outward. Caleb often wondered how a creature like Rex, built for war, trained to kill, could still show such calmness, such focus. Rex didn't bark needlessly. He didn't whine for attention. He simply did his job, just like Caleb. Maybe that's why they got along. The radio crackled with static, then silence again. Caleb's fingers tapped the mug, the only rhythm in the stillness. "Nothing today," he murmured. He reached toward the glove box for a protein bar when Rex suddenly stiffened beside him. The dog's body went rigid, ears pointed forward like twin antennae. A low growl buzzed in his throat. Caleb froze. "What is it, boy?" Rex barked once, sharp, urgent, then again, more forcefully. His tail rose, back legs tensed. Then, without warning, he pawed at the door and let out a short, clipped yelp. Not fear, demand. Caleb's gut clenched. He knew that bark. Without hesitation, he opened his door and stepped out into the snow. The wind slapped his face. Rex leapt from the cruiser, nose to the ground, moving fast and low. Caleb followed, already scanning. "Rex, heel!" But the dog didn't stop. He only glanced back to make sure Caleb was close behind. They cut through the empty street, boots and paws sinking into fresh powder. Rex led them off the road, down a narrow lane between closed shops, his snout twitching with every step. Then Caleb saw them. Footprints. Small. Barely visible. The wind was starting to erase them. He crouched for a second. Child size. No tread. Dragging slightly. "Jesus," he muttered. He stood, now following Rex at a near run. The dog pulled harder, chest low, nose close to the snow, weaving toward the edge of town, toward the old bakery that had shut down last year. The alley behind it was narrow, boxed in by dumpsters and metal stairs covered in icicles. And there, at the far end, a flash of color. Rex stopped, barked, loud. Caleb's eyes followed the bark. A small shape was crumpled in the snow. Pink coat, bare legs, curled into herself like a fallen bird. He didn't speak. He didn't shout. He ran. and the sound of Rex's whine beside him cut through the wind like a siren. The wind howled low through the alley behind the shuttered bakery, lifting powdered snow into small whirls, like ghosts retreating into corners. Officer Caleb Hart's boots crunched through the icy layer as he approached the crumpled pink figure. His breath caught in his chest, not from the cold, but from something older, more familiar. A feeling he hadn't let near him in years. The shape in the snow didn't move. Rex stood just a few feet ahead, motionless now, ears high and nose tilted forward, his entire posture protective. The German shepherd's breath came in sharp clouds as he glanced back at Caleb with that knowing urgency only a K9 trained in life and death could express. Caleb crouched beside the child. Up close, the girl looked impossibly small. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her pink coat, thin and torn at one sleeve, was soaked through and dusted with fine snow. Her brown hair was tangled, frozen in wisps against her cheek. One boot was gone. Her arms were curled around a battered teddy bear, and her lips were pale blue. Caleb removed his gloves quickly, pressing 2 fingers gently against her neck. There it was. A heartbeat. Weak, thready, but there. He let out a shaky breath and brushed a patch of snow from her forehead. Her skin was so cold it burned. "Hey," he whispered, voice cracking the silence. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" No response. He unzipped his coat in one swift movement and pulled her into his chest, wrapping the thick fabric around both of them. She was frighteningly light, like a bundle of leaves inside a coat. The teddy bear slipped from her fingers, and Rex, without instruction, picked it up in his mouth like it was made of porcelain. "Good boy," Caleb murmured, rising to his feet with the child in his arms. The snow crunched harder underfoot now, the weight of her pressing into him, not just physically, but somewhere deeper, somewhere he had locked up for too long. Rex led the way back, glancing over his shoulder, the bear dangling softly from his jaws. Inside the SUV, Caleb turned the heat to full blast. He laid the girl across the back seat as gently as he could, propping her feet toward the vents, and wrapped a thermal emergency blanket around her. Then he climbed in front and radioed with calm precision that belied the tightness in his throat. "Dispatch, Unit 12, found juvenile female, unconscious, possible hypothermia, transporting now." "Copy, Unit 12, hospital notified." Caleb looked in the mirror. The girl hadn't moved. Her eyelashes looked white now, rimmed with frost. He reached over and set the teddy bear beside her. Rex jumped into the front seat but didn't settle. Instead, he stood with his front paws on the dashboard, watching her through the barrier, ears perked, body stiff. "Yeah," Caleb muttered, gripping the steering wheel. "I know, buddy." As he pulled onto the road, something sharp pricked at the base of his throat. Not panic, not even urgency. It was that slow-blooming ache that started in the chest and crawled upward when you realized you were holding something too fragile. And still, his mind asked the questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she alone in this cold? A part of him already feared the answer. They passed empty streets and shuttered storefronts. The hospital loomed ahead, its red brick barely visible behind the drifting snow. A few blocks away, the girl stirred. It was faint at first, a twitch of her fingers. Then her head rolled slightly to the side, and a soft whimper escaped her lips. Caleb slowed the vehicle, glancing back. "Hey," he said quietly, "you're okay." Her eyes cracked open. Wide brown eyes, clouded with confusion and fear. She blinked, then locked onto Rex, who had turned around to look at her. The girl reached one small hand out and rested it on the teddy bear beside her. Then, barely audible, "My mama, she fell and won't wake up." Caleb swallowed. His hands remained steady on the wheel. "What's your name?" "Lila." "Lila, I'm Officer Caleb. That's Rex. We found you in the snow. Can you tell me where your mom is?" Lila nodded weakly. "Cedar Street, 22, the green porch." "Okay, we're going to see her right now." As he turned off toward the east end of town, Caleb met Rex's eyes briefly. The dog gave a soft chuff, laying back down now that the girl was awake. 22 Cedar was easy to find, an old one-story home with sagging shutters and a crooked mailbox. The porch light was still on, glowing faintly behind a layer of snow-covered glass. Caleb parked and turned to Lila. "Stay here. Keep warm. I'll go check on your mom." But Lila's eyes widened in panic. "She's scared when I leave." Caleb hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but stay right next to me. He helped her out of the SUV and carried her through the snow up the creaking wooden steps. The key was under a loose floorboard on the porch, she told him with a whisper. The lock clicked open, and a wave of cold, stale air met them. The house was darker than it should have been, with curtains drawn tight. It smelled of old wood, unwashed dishes, and something sharper, like iron. Rex entered first, ears high, moving cautiously. Caleb kept Lila pressed against his chest. They passed through a small living room with faded furniture and scattered crayons. Drawings lined the wall, crude hearts and stick figures labeled Mommy and Me. The kitchen lay beyond, and that's where they saw her. A woman, maybe in her early 30s, lay crumpled on the kitchen floor in a threadbare hoodie and pajama pants. Her auburn hair had slipped loose from a ponytail. A bottle of medication was spilled near her outstretched hand. Her lips were cracked, skin pale, shallow breaths barely lifting her chest. Claire, Caleb said instinctively, though she hadn't given her name yet. Lila whimpered in his arms. Mama? Caleb gently set the girl down and knelt beside the woman. Her pulse was faint but steady. He grabbed his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Found adult female, unconscious. Same address. Send medical assistance immediately. Copy, Unit 12. Ambulance en route. He pulled his coat over Claire's body to shield her from the cold air leaking in from under the door. Then he turned to Lila. She's still breathing. You did good, Lila. You stayed strong. Lila didn't answer. She just crawled next to Rex, burying her face into his thick fur, her little hands clutching around his collar like it was the only real thing left in the world. And Rex, calm and unmoving, simply let her stay there. Snow flurries danced outside the frosted window, catching in the skeletal branches of the pines that surrounded Caleb Hart's modest home just outside Silver Hollow. The town's ambulance had taken Claire Morgan nearly an hour ago, disappearing into the early morning mist, sirens low but insistent. Caleb had stood for a long time on that porch after they left, Lila tucked into his side, small hand clutching his jacket sleeve. Now, as the cruiser turned into the gravel driveway that wound between birch trees and low fences, Caleb glanced at the girl curled up in the back seat. Lila had fallen asleep again, her head tilted against Rex's thick flank. The dog didn't move, just sat there like a sentinel, breathing slow, warm, and steady. The house was small but sturdy, blue-gray siding, white shutters, a sloped roof sagging slightly under the weight of old snow. The porch was swept clean, a small rocking chair still creaked faintly from the wind. Lights glowed softly behind thick curtains. Caleb stepped out and opened the back door gently. Hey, Lila, he said. We're here. The girl blinked awake slowly, confusion clouding her gaze until she saw Rex, who gave a low tail thump against the seat. She nodded, wordless. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and cedar greeted them. A cast-iron stove clicked quietly from the living room, radiating heat into the house. On the far side of the room, in a high-backed chair knitted with age and yarn, sat June Hart, Caleb's mother. June was in her early 70s, but sharp-eyed and strong-willed. Her silver hair was pulled into a soft bun, strands of steel curling along her temples. She wore a thick burgundy cardigan over a faded flannel dress, and her slippers looked hand-stitched. Her face, though lined with age, bore the softness of someone who had seen pain and still chose to offer kindness. She looked up from her knitting and stood slowly, her gaze landing on Lila first. Well now, she said gently, what do we have here? Caleb knelt to remove Lila's shoes, only one, the other foot wrapped in a blanket. This is Lila, he said. We found her outside this morning. Her mother's at the hospital. No next of kin listed. I didn't want to leave her with strangers. June gave a small hum of approval, walking over and kneeling, though stiffly, beside the girl. Her hands were warm and dry. Lila, she said softly, would you like to come sit by the fire with me for a bit? The girl didn't speak, but she looked at Rex. When the dog walked forward and settled beside the hearth, Lila followed. She sat cross-legged on the floor next to him, her small fingers burying into the fur at his shoulder. June watched for a long moment, then turned to Caleb with her voice barely above a whisper. That dog knew she needed home before we even got the door open. Caleb exhaled and nodded, removing his jacket and hanging it on the hook beside the door. She hasn't said much, just that her mom collapsed. She stayed alone all night and went looking for help. June's face twitched, motherly instinct catching on that word, alone. She glanced back at Lila, who now leaned slightly against Rex's flank. The girl's eyes were half closed, lips beginning to thaw into something like calm. Caleb moved to the kitchen to put on coffee. The old place hadn't changed much since his father passed away 7 years ago. Pictures still hung crooked on the wall. A wooden plaque that read, "Love Grows Here," hovered above the pantry door. Familiarity steadied his nerves. June joined him a few minutes later, stirring sugar into her tea. "What's her story?" she asked. "Not sure yet. Her name's Lila Morgan, no record of a father. Her mom's name is Claire. Found her passed out on the kitchen floor, low pulse, empty pill bottle nearby. Could be hypoglycemia, maybe chronic illness. She's still unconscious. And no extended family?" "Not that we could find." June took a slow sip. "Then she stays here." Caleb raised a brow. "Don't look at me like that, son. You brought her here. That means something. And Rex hasn't moved from her side since you walked in." They both turned as the dog padded softly into the kitchen, his nails ticking across the wood floor. He paused beside Lila, still curled on the rug, and lay back down, his head resting near her knee. "She trusts him more than either of us," Caleb murmured. "She trusts the one who didn't say a word but stayed anyway," June said, placing her hand on her son's arm. "Sometimes, that's all a child needs." As dusk settled in and snow fell heavier against the windows, June cooked a simple stew, potatoes, carrots, bits of turkey left from the night before. The smell drifted through the house like a warm hand. Lila ate in silence, only nodding when asked if she was hungry. That night, Caleb set up a small bed in the den, a folded mattress with fresh sheets, thick blankets, and one of June's handmade quilts. Lila lay beneath it, the teddy bear tucked beneath her arm. Rex lay on the floor beside her without instruction. Caleb leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "I'll check on her mother tomorrow." June nodded. "We'll figure the rest out later." He stayed a while longer, watching the rise and fall of the blanket as Lila slept. For the first time in years, something shifted inside him. It wasn't just duty. It wasn't guilt. It felt like repair. In the soft silence of the room, June's voice came low behind him. "You always thought Rex was just a partner, but sometimes dogs know who's broken, before we do." Snow still blanketed the earth like a soft silence, as Caleb Hart parked his cruiser outside Silver Hollow General. It was early afternoon, but the sky carried the dim gray hue of perpetual winter, the kind that settled into your bones and made time itself feel slower. Inside the hospital, the fluorescent lights felt too harsh after the muted white of the outside world. Caleb walked through the lobby with quiet purpose, his boots echoing softly against linoleum floors. Nurses moved past him, some with trays, others with tablets, their faces wearing the mix of calm and fatigue that only came with experience. At the front desk sat Nurse Melody Crane, a short, round woman in her late 40s with auburn curls tucked behind her ears and a tiny snowflake pin on her navy blue scrubs. Her tone was brisk but kind, eyes tired but warm. "You're here to see Claire Morgan?" she asked after Caleb introduced himself. "Yes, I'm Officer Caleb Hart. I brought her in." Melody scanned the screen. "She's in room 214. Stable for now, still weak. She woke up once this morning, but went back under quickly. No known allergies on file and no insurance information. The system had nothing recent on her." "She mentioned losing her papers," Caleb said, glancing down the hallway. "Anything else I should know?" "She's dehydrated, malnourished. Blood pressure's still low, but she's conscious now. You can go in, but keep it short." Caleb nodded his thanks and made his way down the hall. The room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of the heart monitor and the occasional hiss of the IV. Claire Morgan lay on the bed, eyes half-lidded, her pale skin stark against the white sheets. Her features were sharp but gentle, long cheekbones, narrow nose, lashes thick against her cheeks. Her hair, a deep auburn tangled in waves, spilled across the pillow. She looked younger than he expected, early 30s maybe, but life had left its fingerprints on her. The dark circles, the brittle nails, the small tremor in her hand as she stirred. Caleb hesitated before speaking. "Claire?" Her eyes fluttered open, groggy at first, then widened. "Lila?" "She's safe," he said gently, stepping closer. She's warm, fed, and sleeping at my house, with my mother, and Rex." Claire exhaled a slow breath of relief, her whole body seeming to loosen. "Thank God." They sat in silence for a few seconds before Claire's voice broke it, quiet and hoarse. "I'm sorry. I didn't want it to get this bad. We were doing okay for a while. Not great, but we had a routine." "What happened?" Caleb asked. Claire shifted, wincing slightly. "We were staying at a rental above a bar downtown. Paid month to month, nothing fancy. Then the owner died. His kids took over. Wanted everyone out so they could remodel and triple the rent. I had 1 week to move. I packed what I could into my old sedan. It died 2 days later. Couldn't fix it." She blinked, looking away. "I didn't even realize I'd left the box with our records. Birth certificates, Lila's medical file, my insurance cards, everything." "Why not go to a shelter?" Caleb asked, careful not to let his tone become judgmental. Claire's voice dropped. "I tried. Most were full. One of them told me Lila might be taken by child services if I didn't have proof of income. So I kept her close." Caleb said nothing. He'd heard stories like this before, but hearing and witnessing were different things. After a moment, Claire whispered, "There's a chance that box is still at the old place. I buried some things behind the garage once, just in case. Didn't want Lila to see me carrying papers about my diagnosis." "Diagnosis?" Claire hesitated. "Chronic anemia. It comes and goes, causes fainting, exhaustion, but I didn't want it to define me, or scare her." Caleb stood. "We'll go look. Maybe Rex can help." A small, unexpected smile touched Claire's lips. "He seems remarkable." "He is," Caleb said simply, and left. Later that day, with Lila bundled in a thick coat and mittens, Rex riding quietly in the back, they returned to the old rental house. It stood hunched at the edge of the town, the second-story windows boarded, the front porch sagging like a tired shoulder. The yard behind was blanketed in fresh snow. Lila hesitated as they stepped out of the car, holding the teddy bear tighter. "Is Mama really going to be okay?" she asked. "She's strong," Caleb said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "But finding that box could help make sure she gets the care she needs." Rex sniffed the air and moved with certainty toward the side of the yard. He paused behind a leaning shed, ears perked. Then, with a few brisk digs of his paws, snow flew in all directions. Lila gasped. Within seconds, something metallic appeared beneath the disturbed earth. A rusty tin box sealed with an old clasp. Caleb knelt and opened it. Inside, dry and neatly stacked, were photographs of Claire as a teenager, a young woman holding baby Lila, a copy of Claire's medical report, and, most importantly, a slightly bent state-issued health insurance card. Lila looked down at it all and whispered, "That's Mama's handwriting." Caleb closed the box gently. "You found your way in the snow," and Rex helped find the rest. Lila looked at the dog, who wagged once, then bumped her gently with his head. It was mid-morning when the snow let up, leaving Silver Hollow under a thin layer of sunlight that softened the edges of rooftops and trees. Caleb Hart stood outside the Department of Family and Social Services with Claire and Lila beside him, both bundled in jackets loaned from June's closet. The wind was still sharp, but not biting, more like a quiet warning that winter wasn't finished just yet. Caleb had offered to go alone, to handle the paperwork and vouch for Claire, but Claire insisted on being there. She wore a borrowed peacoat that was slightly too big, the sleeves bunching near her hands. Her auburn hair had been washed and braided by June that morning, and though her cheeks still looked pale, her eyes held more fire than fog now. Lila walked beside her silently, clinging to the soft paw of Rex, who padded loyally between them like a shaggy guardian angel. Inside the office, the walls were lined with posters of smiling families and emergency resource pamphlets. The linoleum floor was freshly mopped, the scent of bleach lingering faintly. The receptionist, a man in his early 20s with buzzed hair and large, tired eyes, directed them to wait in room 2. 10 minutes later, the door opened and Miss Dana Rose stepped in. Dana was in her early 50s, tall and slender, with a graceful posture that came from years of discipline. Her skin was olive-toned, and her salt and pepper hair was tied back into a neat bun. She wore a dark gray pantsuit, and her glasses rested low on her nose. Her eyes, sharp but not unkind, swept across the room, analyzing each of them before she spoke. "You must be Claire Morgan," she said, walking forward to shake hands. "And Lila." Lila gave a small nod, half hiding behind Rex, who stood still as a statue, his eyes never leaving Dana's hands. Dana sat across from them, flipping open a tablet. "I've reviewed the preliminary report filed by Officer Hart. You were found unconscious at your residence, with your daughter having wandered outside in freezing temperatures seeking help." Claire's voice was quiet but firm. "Yes, I collapsed. I hadn't eaten properly in days. I tried my best. I didn't want her to see me that way." Dana's tone was calm. "I'm not here to judge you, Miss Morgan. I'm here to assess the safety and well-being of your child and the long-term stability of your home." Claire's shoulders sagged, her hand reaching instinctively for Lila, who stepped closer. Rex sat beside them both, tail brushing lightly against Lila's calf. Caleb leaned forward. "She's been through enough. I've seen parents unfit for care. Claire doesn't fall into that category." Dana turned her gaze on him, expression unreadable. "And you are?" "Officer Caleb Hart. I found Lila that morning. My K-9 partner Rex led us to her. She was nearly frozen. Since then, she has been staying with me and my mother, June Hart, a retired nurse. We've been taking care of her while Claire recovers." Dana raised an eyebrow. "A police officer assuming temporary care of a minor. That's not typical protocol." "I know," Caleb replied, "but we didn't have time for red tape. Claire had no next of kin. I wasn't going to leave Lila in a shelter." There was a pause. Then, Lila, who had been silent until now, looked up at Dana and spoke softly. "Rex found me in the snow. Then Officer Caleb brought me hope." The room went still. Dana blinked slowly, her expression thawing slightly. "That's very brave of you to say, sweetheart." Claire wiped a tear from her eye. Dana looked between them again, then adjusted her glasses and tapped a few notes on the tablet. "Given the circumstances, and provided that Miss Morgan agrees, I will file for a temporary guardianship review. Claire, you'll need to submit medical documentation and a basic recovery plan. Caleb, if you're willing to sign as temporary sponsor, we can keep Lila out of foster care for now." "I am," Caleb said without hesitation. Dana looked at June's medical background, which had been included in the supplemental file Caleb handed over earlier. "June Hart, a registered nurse for 35 years, lives in a family-owned home. That helps." Claire finally found her voice again. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I had a job, a plan. When we lost the apartment, everything fell apart." Dana nodded. "Life can be merciless, but you're here, you're trying, that counts." They spent the next half hour discussing steps. Claire would stay at Caleb's home during her recovery. Lila would continue receiving daily care, and the case would be reviewed weekly. Dana was firm, but fair, explaining legal terms in simple language, never raising her voice, never offering pity. Only structure. Before they left, Dana knelt in front of Lila and handed her a sticker sheet. "One for every brave day," she said. "Start with today." Lila smiled for the first time since arriving. Outside, the sun peeked through the clouds as they stepped onto the front steps of the building. Claire turned to Caleb, her voice trembling. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that morning." "I didn't stop," he said quietly. "Rex did." The dog gave a low bark as if in agreement and nudged Lila's mittened hand. She giggled, the sound like the soft chime of hope in cold air. The snow had melted in patches around Silver Hollow, leaving behind slush and thin ribbons of mud along the sidewalks. It was the kind of midwinter thaw that never lasted long, just enough to give people hope before another storm arrived. Inside the hospital, Claire Morgan sat near a window with a warm wool blanket over her legs and a hot cup of chamomile tea in her hands. Her cheeks had regained color, and though her body still ached, there was strength in the way she now sat upright. Her shoulders no longer caved in from fear. Lila had visited that morning with June, carrying a small drawing she had made with Rex by her side. The dog had rested his head on Claire's knee, eyes closed, tail swishing slowly like a metronome of comfort. Caleb hadn't come. He was working the early shift, but his presence lingered in every little comfort Claire had found since waking up on that cold floor. She was finally going home the next day, or so she thought. It happened just after lunch. The nurse had barely stepped out when the door to her room creaked open again. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat entered, followed by a younger man in a gray suit with slick-back hair and a folder in hand. The taller man stood about 6'2", with a chiseled jawline and a trim beard, the kind that looked carefully maintained rather than rugged. His hair was dark brown, with just a trace of silver at the temples. His eyes, an icy blue, swept across the room and landed squarely on Claire. "Nathan?" Her voice cracked. "Nathan Cole," he said, his tone clipped and formal. "It's been a long time." Claire felt her body go rigid. Her grip on the teacup tightened. The man beside him cleared his throat. "Miss Morgan, I'm attorney Brian Keene. Mr. Cole has come to assert his parental rights." Claire blinked. "You what?" Nathan took a step forward, hands clasped behind his back. "I understand that Lila has been through a traumatic event. I'm here to ensure she doesn't suffer any further. I have her birth certificate and documentation proving I'm her biological father. I want full custody." Claire stared at him, stunned. "You disappeared. You haven't seen her in 3 years." Nathan's jaw tensed. "I had my reasons, but I'm back now, and I intend to provide her a better life. Structure, safety, stability." He sounded like he was reciting from a business pitch. Claire felt the air grow colder despite the hiding system humming behind her. Before she could respond, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Then came a growl, low and menacing. "Rex." The German shepherd burst through the slightly ajar door, his fur bristling, his eyes locked on Nathan. In one fluid motion, he stood squarely between Claire and the man, teeth barely bared, body rigid with tension. From behind him, Caleb appeared. He wasn't wearing his uniform, just a thick flannel shirt under a black canvas jacket, but his expression was all authority. "Back up," he said to Nathan, eyes narrow. "Slowly." Nathan raised both hands, surprised. "Is this how you treat a concerned father?" Rex growled louder. Caleb moved beside Claire's bed and gently placed a hand on her shoulder before addressing the lawyer. "You say you have paperwork. I've got some too. A provisional guardianship order filed with Family Services. A psychologist's preliminary report indicating that reintroducing Lila to a long-absent parent could be emotionally harmful at this stage. You can take your concern and schedule a proper hearing." Brian Keene shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Cole has a right to see his daughter." "Not today," Caleb said flatly, "and not like this." Claire finally found her voice again, shaking. "You didn't even send a birthday card." Nathan's eyes flicked away. Rex didn't move an inch, his body still taut, tail low, a silent sentinel. Caleb stepped closer to Nathan. "If you want a relationship with her, you'll need to prove you care about more than her name on a certificate, because right now, all you've proven is that you know how to show up with a lawyer." Nathan's lips tightened. He looked as if he wanted to argue, but Brian touched his arm. "Let's not escalate. We'll be in touch." As the two men exited, Rex didn't budge until they were fully out of sight. Then, slowly, his ears flicked back and his body relaxed. He turned and nudged Claire's hand gently, as if asking, "You okay?" Claire nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I was so sure we were past the worst," she whispered. Caleb pulled a chair beside her bed and sat down heavily. "We are, but sometimes the past waits until you're standing back on your feet, and then it knocks." Claire gave a bitter laugh through her tears. Outside the hospital window, the wind had picked up again, scattering dried leaves across the street. The sky was turning steel gray. Inside, the silent war had only just begun. The courthouse in Silver Hollow was an old sandstone building with iron-framed windows that fogged easily in the cold. That afternoon, snow drifted silently through the wind as if the sky itself were holding its breath. The flag outside the building hung limp, and the wooden double doors groaned faintly as they opened to admit the small group huddled inside. Caleb Hart held the door open for Claire, who wore a plain gray coat borrowed from June and a wool hat pulled low over her eyes. Though her body was still fragile, her posture had changed, no longer hunched by shame or fear. There was a quiet strength in her steps. Lila walked beside her, gloved hand tucked tightly into Claire's, and Rex, ever the shadow, walked just behind them, ears pricked and steps deliberate. They were met inside by Miss Dana Rowe, the social worker with sharp glasses and a sharper sense of judgment. Today, however, her usually taut expression softened. She wore a navy pantsuit and carried a thin leather folder under one arm. "Glad you made it. Dana said simply. "The board is waiting upstairs." The hallway smelled faintly of old varnish and coffee. They took the creaky elevator up to the third floor, where the Child Welfare Review Board convened once a week in a modest hearing room lined with paneling and faded portraits of county judges. 3 people sat behind a curved oak desk. In the center was Mr. Hollis Granger, a retired judge now serving in a civilian capacity. He was a short, round man with a bald head and deeply creased skin, his eyes thoughtful but probing. To his left sat Miss Tessa Blake, a middle-aged school counselor with wild, curly auburn hair and a floral scarf that clashed with her blazer. On the right was Dr. Paul Merrick, a child psychologist in his early 50s, lean and neatly dressed, whose salt and pepper beard was trimmed to exact symmetry. Caleb, Claire, Lila, and Rex took their seats. June Hart, in a burgundy cardigan and pearl earrings, sat just behind them, arms folded over her bag in quiet determination. Mr. Granger began the proceedings with a firm yet kind voice. "We're not here to determine guilt or punishment. We're here to ask one question. What is best for the child?" Dana gave a summary of the current circumstances. How Lila had been found, the medical emergencies, the temporary custody arrangement. She included Rex's role not as a passing note, but as part of what saved Lila's life. Then it was time for testimony. Claire stood first. Her voice trembled at the start, but steadied as she spoke. She talked of the eviction, the illness, the desperation. She didn't excuse her past, but explained it. "I was alone, and I failed to ask for help until it was too late," she said, eyes lowered, "but I never stopped loving my daughter." Lila asked to speak next. Tessa knelt beside her to adjust the microphone. "I was cold," Lila began, her voice small but clear, "and scared. Mama didn't wake up. I tried to find help." Her bottom lip trembled. "Then Rex came. He found me. He sniffed me and made Officer Caleb run. And then we got a warm blanket, and a house, and pancakes." There was a light rustle of polite chuckles in the room. "And what do you want now, sweetheart?" Dr. Merrick asked gently. Lila thought for a long time. "I want to stay with Mama, and Rex, and Mr. Caleb, and Grandma June. I don't want new people anymore." Caleb took the stand last. He recounted the discovery in the snow, the days since, the emotional progress Claire had made, and the unshakable bond Lila had formed, not just with Rex, but with a home she had never known she needed. When asked if he intended to pursue permanent custody, Caleb replied simply, "Not unless that's what Claire and Lila both want. I'm here to support, not to take." Finally, June stepped forward. The retired nurse spoke with quiet authority, describing Claire's steady improvement and the gentle attentiveness she'd seen in Lila. "This little girl has known fear far too young," June said, her voice tinged with emotion. "But I've seen the way she curls into her mother's side now. I've watched how Rex follows her from room to room. This is not a household in chaos. It's one in recovery." After a brief recess, the board returned. Dana stood to deliver the final remarks. "The department recommends continuing the current guardianship arrangement, with supervised evaluations at 3-month intervals. Claire Morgan remains primary caregiver. Caleb Hart and June Hart are formally recognized as supporting guardians. Rex, the K-9 partner, will also remain part of the household, as his therapeutic impact is documented and observed." Mr. Granger smiled. "Miss Rowe, that is the most unusual inclusion we've had in months." Dana nodded. "Unusual, but warranted." He turned to Lila, eyes crinkling. "You've got quite the team, young lady." She beamed. Outside, the snowfall had started again. But to the small group walking down the courthouse steps, it didn't feel quite so cold anymore. Claire took a long breath and leaned slightly against Caleb's arm as they walked toward the truck. Lila tugged at Rex's leash, chatting to him about drawing something special when they got home. June glanced at the sky. "Snow's coming again." Caleb looked down at the girl beside him, then at the German shepherd, tail wagging as if sensing something good. "Let it come," he murmured. "We've got a roof now, and something worth keeping warm." The snow had begun to melt along the edges of Silver Hollow, softening the sharp outlines of rooftops and trees. Icicles, once fierce and dagger-like, now wept silently under the early spring sun. It had been several weeks since the hearing. The world outside was shifting, gently thawing, and so were the lives within the little blue house on Birch Street. Claire Morgan stood at the window, watching the snow recede from the garden. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, and the color had returned to her fair cheeks. The pallor that once clung to her like shadow had lifted. Dressed in a soft cream sweater and jeans, she looked stronger now, not just physically, but in the way she carried herself, back straight, shoulders no longer curled inward. She held a plain manila envelope in one hand. Inside were documents, reinstated health insurance, a new job offer from the Silver Hollow Library, and a bus pass. Simple papers, yet each one a stepping stone back to independence. She exhaled slowly and turned toward the kitchen. At the table, June Hart was preparing dinner. The retired nurse wore her favorite faded blue apron, embroidered with small violets. Her silver-gray hair was pinned in a loose bun, and she moved with practiced grace, hands steady, eyes sharp. Though her voice had the softness of a grandmother's warmth, her presence in the household remained quietly commanding. "Claire," June said, not turning from the stew pot, "you're pacing. That means either you've got good news or you're about to talk yourself out of something important." Claire chuckled, easing into a chair. "Both, actually." "Let me guess. You're afraid to start over." Claire opened the envelope and let the document slide onto the table. "It's real now?" June nodded, her eyes on the bubbling pot. "Of course it's real. You lived it. You earned it." At that moment, the front door opened with a gust of wind and the sound of familiar paws. Rex trotted in first, his black and tan coat speckled with flecks of melting snow. The German shepherd, loyal and noble, was now almost 10 years old, but showed no signs of slowing. He paused briefly to shake off the cold, then made a beeline for the living room, where Lila sat with colored pencils and a wide sheet of white paper. Close behind came Officer Caleb Hart, still in his uniform, his badge catching the evening light. His brown hair was tousled from the wind, and his sharp jaw was dark with a day's worth of stubble. He carried a grocery bag in one hand and a pack of Lila's favorite markers in the other. "I come bearing gifts," he announced, his voice easy and warm. Lila perked up immediately, her deep green eyes lighting with joy. She leapt to her feet and hugged him around the waist, then turned her attention to Rex, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. "Rex, guess what?" she beamed. "I drew something for you." Claire leaned forward from her chair. "Let's wait until dinner, then you can show everyone." That evening, they gathered around the table, bowls of stew warming their hands and hearts. Lila chattered about her day, the snow fort she'd half built in the yard, the squirrel she saw outside the window, the book June had read her before nap time. Claire sat quietly for a moment, observing it all. The rhythmic clicking of Caleb's spoon against his bowl, June's gentle laughter, Rex sprawled on the rug beside Lila's chair. And then, unexpectedly, Claire's voice broke the hum of contentment. "If Rex hadn't found her," she trailed off, swallowed hard, then looked directly at Caleb. "I don't know what would have happened." Caleb reached out, resting a reassuring hand over hers. "But he did. And you're both here. That's what matters." Claire gave a tight nod, eyes misting. Lila stood up then, her paper held behind her back. "I made something," she said shyly, "for all of us." She unfolded the picture and placed it carefully in the center of the table. It was a drawing of a small blue house surrounded by melting snow. In front stood 4 figures, a tall man in a police uniform with a badge, a woman with long hair and a bright smile, a girl in pink, and a big dog with alert ears and a wagging tail. Above them was a single sun, and below in shaky, colorful letters, "Family is who saves you when you can't call for help." Silence settled around the table, thick and sweet like honey. June dabbed at her eyes with the edge of her apron. Caleb gave a quiet whistle through his teeth. Rex, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, lifted his head and gently nudged Lila's leg with his nose. She giggled and crouched to hug him. He stayed there, resting his head in her lap, eyes half closed. Claire leaned forward and traced the letters with her fingers. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." "It's us," Lila whispered. "It's home." Outside, the last light of day danced across melting snowdrifts. The stars hadn't come out yet. But inside, the glow from the kitchen light wrapped around them like a blanket. Sometimes, miracles don't come with a trumpet or a blinding light. Sometimes, they arrive on 4 paws, with snow on their nose and eyes that see through pain. Like Rex, a dog who didn't just find a little girl in the snow. He found a family waiting to be healed. In a world where headlines shout of heartbreak, this story is a quiet whisper from God reminding us, no one is ever truly alone. Love arrives, through strangers, through second chances, and yes, sometimes through a K9's gentle nudge. So, if you're watching this right now, maybe it's not by accident. Maybe this story is your sign, from above, that hope still walks among us. That the next time someone knocks on your door, or a small voice says, "Please help," you'll be the miracle they've been waiting for. May God bless every child searching for warmth, every mother clinging to hope, every soul who's ever felt forgotten. And may He bless you, the one listening now, with peace, compassion, and the courage to care. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and share where you're watching from. Let the world see how far one act of kindness can travel. Share it. Comment your prayer. Subscribe for more stories where love leads the way. Because together we can keep these small miracles alive.